January 1942. A brash U-boat skipper surfaces to give his crew a once-in-a-lifetime view of the Manhattan skyline. Part of a secret Nazi operation, he commands one of 5 submarines ready to bring the war to America's doorstep.
Feindliche Schiff.
With determined enemies in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and barely a month since the start of their war, how much damage will these U-boats inflict before the United States can fight back? In World War II, a subsea weapon allows warriors to fight from beneath the waves with cunning, force, and tenacity. Their enemies strike back. Revolutionary, but still sometimes primitive. It's a desperate bid to change the course of war. Their stories are legend. In January 1942, off the coast of Long Island, New York, a British oil tanker steams to join an Atlantic convoy to England. Well inside American waters, it expects no danger. A lurking Nazi U-boat skipper, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan, cannot believe his good fortune. As he prowls the dark water, the tanker has almost run into his German submarine.
Torpedo 1, fluten.
Hartigan will not pass up an easy shot and positions his U-boat. At 3:41 a.m., he fires a single torpedo. Less than a minute later, the explosion lights up the night sky, sending flames high in the air. U-123 has torpedoed 65,000 barrels of oil, just 85 miles from the lights of Manhattan, with no response from American defenses. It's an opening strike of what the Germans call Paukenschlag, Operation Drumbeat. And for America, it struck too close to home. 1 month earlier, the Japanese ambush on Pearl Harbor catches the United States off guard. In Germany, commander of U-boats Karl Dönitz begs the Fuhrer for a chance to do the same.
Dönitz wants to smack the Americans. Hitler wants him to smack the Americans. There's no question.
But Hitler's primary focus is on the ground war and defeating the Soviet Union. He doesn't fully appreciate the potential of U-boat warfare to strangle the Allied war effort. Hitler grants Dönitz only limited resources for an audacious plan. Dönitz hopes to shock the U.S. with a series of submarine attacks right off the American coast. The targets will be merchant ships, which transport goods along the eastern seaboard.
The vital cargo shipping, particularly the vital oil, move individually up and down the American coast to the convoy assembly points. This is a particular vulnerability.
Dönitz handpicks a group of U-boat commanders for the job. This includes Reinhard Hartigan, an ambitious officer. His combat career is about to be cut short.
His career was limited due to his bad health from an aircraft accident before the war, when he served in the aeronautical service of the Kriegsmarine. Hartigan knew to become something like a hero or an ace, he had to perform very well. So he needed to be aggressive and risk a lot to have success.
He'll have few patrols to secure his legacy. A week before Christmas, U-boats begin to sneak out from the base at Lorient on the coast of occupied France. Patrols often last 70 or 80 days. Fresh water is only used for drinking. Crews refrain from shaves, showers, or washing laundry. Perishable foods last only about a week in the humidity of the U-boat. After that, the crew relies mostly on canned goods and other preserves. The austere conditions take a toll on Hartigan. The abdominal injury from his earlier plane crash never fully healed.
He had stomach problems, but he couldn't get a special diet aboard a submarine because the kitchen is very, very limited.
With a bleeding stomach, Hartigan cannot eat much of the food prepared for his men. In chronic pain and underfed, Hartigan focuses on the job at hand. A larger submarine, called Type 9s, allow them to attempt the daring operation. The 250-foot length makes it more than 30 feet longer than the Type 7s. Bigger bunkers increase fuel capacity for an extended range up to 12,000 miles.
The Type 9 is the classic instrument for this long-range offensive. They can cross the Atlantic and they can operate for some time in their operational area.
The crew of U-123 spends the Christmas of 1941 at sea. Hartigan has Christmas trees placed in every compartment for the men to decorate. Letters and packages from home are distributed. With food and music, the crew can leave the war behind, if only for a few hours. On December 27th, 4 days into their journey, they cross 20 degrees west. U-123 is considered on active combat duty. The crew gets a pay raise, and Hartigan can open the top secret operation orders. They know they are heading to the east coast of North America, but even their captain doesn't know where exactly. Hartigan reveals the details of their mission.
Wirklich nach New York?
They are to seek and destroy merchant ships in the waters around New York City. The 4 other U-boats have similar orders against different parts of the Atlantic coast. Admiral Dönitz calls the campaign Paukenschlag, or Operation Drumbeat. But Hartigan has a problem. Shallow waters are full of hazards and difficult to navigate. U-boat headquarters can't even provide proper nautical charts.
Because the Germans hadn't prepared for this before the war, all he has is a sort of a map of New York, a general chart of the waters, and a guidebook.
To safely negotiate inshore shipping lanes while he hunts and sinks ships will require all of Hartigan's skills. But first, the 3,500-mile crossing takes U-boat 123 through the worst of winter storms.
You have a wind blowing up to 70 miles per hour. If it's stormy outside, like in the North Atlantic, it's not the place where you want to be.
A low-pressure trough creates storm-force winds and rough seas. 30-foot waves crash across the conning tower. But to maintain full speed, Hartigan rides U-123 on the surface. Submerged, his speed is limited to a maximum of 8 knots in short bursts. Surfaced, he can push twice as fast, nearly 22 miles per hour. His lookout crews spend 4-hour shifts all day and night, searching constantly for threats and targets. As the world wearily rings in another year of war, 5 Nazi U-boats cruise towards operational areas, from Canada's Gulf of St. Lawrence to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
The U-boat commanders are very excited about doing this. They had got very, very frustrated in the autumn of 1941 that they were attacking convoys escorted by American ships, and they weren't allowed to take the initiative in sinking American ships. That will serve them right for this undeclared war they've been waging before Pearl Harbor.
Blown off course by the winter storms, U-123 reaches the east coast early.
Steuerbord 20 Grad.
Kapitän Leutnant Reinhard Hartigan and his crew have been on constant watch. They discover and stalk an enemy target 110 miles from the coast. It could be a merchant ship or an Allied destroyer.
Steuerbord 20 Grad.
Hartigan maneuvers for a closer look. A British steamer, about 10,000 tons, likely filled with Allied supplies. It's a lucrative target. But 2 days before the start of the secret mission, he would reveal their position. Hartigan is still tempted.
Submarine commanders are always very aggressive, and the sight of an Allied merchant ship was something that Hartigan could not resist.
Targeting the steamer, Hartigan launches his first torpedo.
Torpedo fire.
To ignite a fiery glow against the night sky. Radio operators aboard U-123 intercept the ship's emergency transmissions. SOS, then SSS, the distress code used while under attack by submarine. To safeguard their mission, Hartigan must silence his victim. He positions U-123 to launch another torpedo. His crew aims for the bridge to target the radio sending the distress call. Seconds later, another explosion brightens the night sky. Passengers and crew of the ship Cyclops drift for 20 hours. Only 2 are killed in the initial attack. 86 more die from exposure to the icy waters of the North Atlantic. U-123 launches the first unofficial strike of Operation Drumbeat. Stormy seas in their attack have delayed Hartigan and the crew. They must now hurry to reach their real target, New York City. Hartigan anticipates trouble.
Neuer Kurs, 15 Grad Nord.
His attack has announced the presence of a Nazi U-boat to the Allies. He expects heavy defenses as he nears the coast. But it turns out the U-boat mission was not a surprise. After all. American Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews is tasked with protecting the eastern seaboard of the United States.
He is the commander most responsible, if you like, for coastal convoys and things like that. But at the beginning of 1942, there's nothing he has. It just doesn't exist.
America has only been at war for a few weeks, and not by choice. They've only just begun to mobilize the men and machines needed to fight enemies off 2 coasts. The sinking of Cyclops confirms what Andrews feared, based on intelligence from Allied codebreakers. As soon as Nazi U-boats leave port, British intelligence exploit a key weakness in Karl Dönitz's submarine operations.
You need a lot of communication between the submarines and with the headquarters in Europe. And these radio transmissions could be intercepted by the Allied forces.
As the Allies build a fairly substantial direction-finding system around the world with stations all over the place. If you transmit, use your radio, people around the world will pretty quickly figure out where you are.
This allows Allied naval intelligence to pinpoint the location of any German submarine whose messages are intercepted.
The British can keep pretty good tabs on where a submarine is because of this fixation the U-boats have with transmitting on radio. It's rather like saying, hello, I'm here, come and sink me. And this is a terrible weakness.
U.S. Rear Admiral Andrews appeals for resources to defend the eastern seaboard, knowing that more U-boats are coming to the North American coast. But his senior officer, Admiral Ernest King, has even bigger problems.
In January 1942, Admiral King is Chief of Naval Operations. He's in charge of the whole U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy is building a lot of ships, but they don't exist yet. He's already fighting U-boats in connection with the British. There are already large U.S. forces committed to that job. He can't just write off the Pacific. And because of the enormous distances, anything he does in the Pacific costs a lot of resources. King is faced with these terrible choices.
There are limited assets to mount any defense against the approaching U-boats. Clear skies allow Hartigan to pinpoint his exact position after days of bad weather, and he sets a course for New York. He's behind schedule. 4 other U-boats, delayed by stormy seas too, also close in. U-130 officially kicks off Operation Drumbeat by sinking 2 small freighters on January 13th near the Newfoundland coast. While Hartigan cruises south in U-123 towards his target area. With crude charts, he is unsure of the coastline.
But he also has the help of the Montauk Point Lighthouse because the Americans haven't turned off their navigational lights.
Everything was lit up. They were still living like in peacetime. The Americans still had their radio navigational aids turned on, so he could rely on that.
Late in the evening off Montauk Point, the crew spots a light on the port side. A large vessel approaches. It could be a threat.
The water is not so deep. It was a very dangerous situation for him.
Without accurate charts, the exact depth of the water is uncertain. Hartigan can't dive to escape. He identifies the approaching ship, which travels fully lit, as though there was no war. An oil tanker. This is what he has come for. Hartigan's watch scans the horizon for any type of escort, but the ship appears alone.
Torpedo abfeuern!
He orders his crew to fire 2 torpedoes at the tanker. But the attack proves disappointing.
His torpedoes didn't explode.
Many of the torpedoes loaded aboard U-123 are G7E models, the most sophisticated electric torpedo in the Nazi arsenal. They're 23 feet long and armed with 600 pounds of explosive power.
He had an electromagnetical device to keep the torpedo exploding below the ship. And if the torpedo is traveling too low, then the magnetic field of the ship is not strong enough to make the torpedo explode.
Hartigan aims higher with consecutive shots.
Torpedo Feuer!
Torpedoed it, and it was a fuel tanker, and there was a large explosion.
But it takes him 5 torpedoes to sink the ship. As the tanker breaks apart, 12,200 tons of fuel oil burn. Its crew broadcasts an emergency message.
When the explosion goes off in the tanker, it thinks that it might have struck a mine. You would have expected a submerged submarine to creep in and lay a minefield and then creep away again, not come in on the surface.
Hardigan makes an escape, but not before U-123 is spotted by survivors in and around the lifeboats. The first eyewitnesses of a Nazi U-boat sinking ships in American waters. Captain Lieutenant Hardigan expects furious countermeasures. But strangely, there is no reply.
The Germans arrive on the east coast of the United States and are just gobsmacked by the fact that the shipping's not protected. To them, it's inexplicable.
After destroying the tanker Nornes, Hardigan submerges during daylight hours. He settles U-123 on the bottom, undetected, while the crew rests and prepares for its next attack. Back on the surface, they monitor local radio channels to learn the tanker Nornes is finally spotted and the crew rescued nearly 12 hours after the sinking.
If there's nothing around, then it doesn't really matter where you get sunk. It'll be a long time before anyone shows up.
Merchant ships also receive the warning of a U-boat in the area. U-123 continues to use the Americans' own navigational aids. Light ships provide orientation. These floating lighthouses mark the entrance to American ports. If the city skylines don't shine brightly enough,
It's impossible for the Navy to convince the governors and mayors of major cities on the coast to black out. People just didn't get the message that this is a war and you must do something.
after 3 weeks at sea, the glow of New York City proves an irresistible beacon.
Hardigan could see the whole skyline of New York, something probably every German dreamt of before the war.
The captain invites his crew up to the bridge to see the lights of Manhattan. But U-123 isn't here to sightsee. As they leave New York Harbor,
Find me your ship.
the stern watchman spots a ship approaching from the rear.
Hardigan, he sees fully lit up against the lights of New York, a tanker, a nice large juicy tanker.
At close to 7,000 tons, British oil tanker Coimbra cruises unescorted out of New York Harbor. Captain Lieutenant Hardigan maneuvers his submarine into attack position with textbook precision.
It's part of the game of the U-boat commander to be cool, to be resolute, to be cold-blooded, at least to appear so, to create confidence within his crew.
Just 800 yards from the target,
Torpedo fire!
he launches his first torpedo. 58 seconds later, a hit. Flames lick 650 feet in the air and light up the night sky. Fueled by 65,000 barrels of oil cargo.
In fact, if anything symbolizes the total unpreparedness of the United States, it's this attack in New York Harbor.
Within minutes of striking the oil tanker Coimbra, 85 miles from Manhattan, U-boat Captain Lieutenant Hardigan fires a second torpedo to speed the sinking and silence any distress signals. Local residents report the ship burning 32 miles off of Long Island. Only 10 of 46 crew members survived to be rescued. With a rash of sinkings and knowledge that even more U-boats are closing in, U.S. Navy leadership monitors the situation closely. In the harbors of New York, an arsenal of 23 ships assemble. Destroyers, carriers, cruisers, and battleships. The Armada is called Task Force 15, ready to escort American troops to the European theater. Admiral Ernie King must consider delaying the troopship convoy, but is confronted by the larger political implications.
Once the United States is in the war, it's vital to show its allies that we're working with them. And that means, among other things, there have to be U.S. troops deployed almost immediately to Britain, Northern Ireland, Iceland. They have to be convoyed there. Now those escorts are not available for other jobs.
In the end, Admiral King dispatches the task force and troops to sail to Europe. Any immediate military response to the U-boat presence is now impossible. Hartigan continues to hide the sub on the ocean floor during daytime hours. As the sun sets on New York on January 15th, U-123 rises to hunt. But they surface too soon. One of the few active American patrol aircraft sees the sub broaching in the last glints of sunlight. Before all the water can clear the bridge, the submarine's lookouts also spot the plane.
Feindlicher Flieger! Alarm! Alle Mann von Bord! Alarm! Lauf, 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 lauf!
Hartigan must dive carefully. They don't know the actual depth of the water, making it difficult to evade any attack. Four aerial bombs go off starboard, but wide of the submarine. They wait. The aircraft does not press the attack or call for reinforcements.
A Navy aircraft dropped some bombs, but they're not very effective. This is right at the beginning of the war. The Americans are very inexperienced, and they just haven't put the effort into anti-submarine warfare. It's not just lack of surface ships that's creating problems, there's lack of aviation assets too.
Since the United States has none of these resources, since it has only a few airplanes flying patrols and not very experienced at it, suddenly there's this tremendous vulnerability.
The U-boats of Operation Drumbeat strike again and again, all along a defenseless coast.
Dunn simply cannot believe his good fortune. There's no other way to describe it. This should not happen. And he finally gets into the American zone, and it's a free fire zone.
In the American press, questions mount about the destruction happening on the doorstep of the United States. But the U.S. Navy seems unwilling or unable to respond.
Afterwards, people keep saying, well, if King had really cared about anything, he would have had convoys, he would have organized. With what? That's the problem. There's no what. It's not as though the coast is bristling with mines and guns and a tough Army bomber crews waiting to go out all the time.
The thing about the U.S. Navy and about Ernie King is they're still pretty much focused on that notion that the primary function of their Navy is to destroy the other guy's Navy. And so it took them a long time to come to the same realization that the Brits did, that what you need is not necessarily the technology to sink submarines. What you need is to send a ship out, drive that guy down, push him off.
Having fought German U-boats for more than 2 years before the United States entered the war, the other allies want to share what has been learned.
The British and the Canadians actually have the capacity in American ports to organize convoys. That was not going to happen under Ernie King's watch. The whole thing was run by the U.S. Navy.
and the Navy is just not prepared. So there is no one to stop Reinhard Hartigan from racking up tonnage. By monitoring the radio frequencies, Hartigan knows local shipping is on alert, and there are fewer ships to target in the area. With some torpedoes left, U-123 widens its range of operations, traveling down the East Coast. When U-123 surfaces near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they spot a red flash and hear two explosions. Hartigan correctly speculates it's the handiwork of U-66, which has just sunk another tanker, the Alan Jackson. In the early morning of January 18th, Hartigan finally locates targets worthy of his remaining torpedoes. But as dawn breaks, he runs out of time to set up the shots. Confident there will be more steamers the next night if he is not spotted, he bottoms his submarine. When night falls, Hartigan decides to hunt in the waters just off of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. He orders U-123 to travel along the navigational buoys, which he notes the steamers keep to their port side. Just before 3 a.m., Hartigan encounters a merchant ship he estimates as 4,000 tons and fires at a very short range of 275 yards. The ship, City of Atlanta, carrying food and cargo, sinks in minutes. Only 3 of 47 crew members would survive the night. Small ships pass, but Hartigan doesn't want to waste his last 2 torpedoes. But he has another weapon at his disposal. Hartigan orders his crews to their deck guns. A tanker, the SS Melee, is empty of fuel, but full of fumes. It erupts under fire from the shells. Hartigan turns and fires a torpedo on another ship nearby, wounding a freighter. Still monitoring the radio channels, they learn that the crew has contained the fires aboard the SS Melee.
Torpedo fire!
Hartigan decides to finish what they started and make good use of their last torpedo. They hit the mark.
Beide Maschinen, halbe Kraft voraus.
His arsenal of torpedoes spent and fuel beginning to run low, Hartigan must turn for home. But as U-123 leaves American waters, the elusive submarine is being followed.
Captain.
Einar Gleditsch, captain of the Norwegian whaler Cosmos II, stalks the U-boat. Many merchant vessels from Norway began transporting goods for the Allies after the Nazi occupation of their homeland.
The commanding officer aboard the civilian ship just did what they already did to British in the First World War. He attempted to ram the submarine.
Ram it.
If the Norwegian can ram the U-boat, the hull damage to U-123 will ensure it will not submerge again. As Cosmos 2 closes in, the crew spots the charging ship.
Feindliche Schiff.
With just 65 feet below them, the waters here are too shallow to dive for protection. U-123 must outrun the Norwegian and turn seawards to deeper waters.
Kurs halten.
But Hartigan can't get enough speed.
His chief engineer told him that he had lost engine power on one of his diesel engines, and so he could not outrun the whaler. The hunter, he turned to be the prey.
Torpedo Feuer.
After attacking Allied merchant shipping from Nova Scotia to North Carolina, the tables have finally turned on U-boat Kapitän Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan. In a strange twist, the attack does not come from the United States Navy or Coast Guard, but a giant whaling ship converted into a fuel tanker in service of the war effort. With one engine down, U-123 limps towards the open ocean. Cosmos 2 is in close pursuit. The enormous whaler cruises only about a knot faster than U-123, but it's enough to slowly gain on the U-boat.
It's quite a dramatic incident because the submarine is not in a good condition. One of its engines is down. That means it can't go at its normal speed on the surface. Therefore, this relatively slow merchantman is possibly going to catch it and hit it. And so we have this extraordinary situation of these two ships rather slowly chasing each other across the Atlantic.
The survival of U-123 may depend on engine mechanic Richard Kraxel.
Scheiß das Rohr, sonst werden wir gerammt.
Schneller, sieh zu! Schneller!
He must prepare a cooling pipe needed to bring the other diesel engine online.
Beeilung!
Wir haben's! Schmeiß die Maschinen an! Sag mal, versuch es! Los, starte!
U-123's second engine springs to life. With the whaler only 80 yards back, the U-boat increases its critical margin, pulling away with a tiny half-knot advantage. Hartigan establishes a northerly course, then redirects into deeper waters, diving to evade enemy aircraft. Hartigan leaves behind the burning wreck of his final target and a battered American coast.
Hartigan was the most successful of the initial wave of drumbeat U-boats. He sinks 8 ships, and it demonstrates what an aggressively handled submarine can do in this target-rich environment.
He is credited with sinking some 50,000 tons of ships. Although his last victim, SS Melee, would limp into port under its own steam. When word of their success reaches U-boat headquarters, Dönitz sends a special message. To the drumbeater Hartigan, bravo, you beat the drum well. U-123 also receives word that Hartigan is to receive the coveted Knight's Cross. The first 5 U-boats of Operation Drumbeat sink 23 ships and kill hundreds of sailors. In Germany, Hitler approves the continuation of the offensive against the American eastern seaboard. Waves of U-boats strike the coast as the German onslaught hammers American shipping. Hardigan and U-123 return again in March, this time sinking 10 more ships.
The Germans sink more ships in the U.S. coastal zone in 1 year than nearly the rest of the war and all the oceans of the world combined. They sink 6 million tons of merchant shipping with submarines in 1942 alone. It's just staggering.
Operation Drumbeat was seen by the German U-boat men as a period where they could gain successes in sinking vessels without meeting resistance. It became probably the second golden age for the U-boats.
Drumbeat was a terrible self-inflicted wound. It was the greatest victory for the U-boats that should never have happened.
Nearly 700 ships go down before the United States Navy is able to implement effective change. American Admiral Ernie King finally establishes a convoy system for merchant shipping in the summer of 1942. U-boat attacks on the East Coast melt away in the face of opposition.
When the Americans learn, they learn fast, and they apply the resources, and they do it very effectively. So it's a steep learning curve, but once they get over it, they move very quickly. The long-term historical legacy of the 1942 catastrophe off the U.S. East Coast I don't think has ever been resolved. It's been suggested to me by American archivists that the U.S. Navy avoids this story like the plague. They just don't want to know about it, and it's hard to blame them.
The silence causes the service and sacrifice of the sailors and their families to be largely forgotten, ignoring the shocking days that the Nazi U-boats brought the war home to American shores.